Welcome to our podcast. God is speaking. Are we listening and obeying? Our special guest today is Bob Shank. Bob, welcome.
Thanks, Joe. And our relationship goes back decades. Neither one of us would have imagined when we first met that we'd end up on a screen together like this.
Yeah, what great context. I think we were introduced by our mutual friend, Bob Buford.
We were, and I think he's probably listening in.
The bar just got a little higher.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Bob. I appreciate you taking your time out to do this. And I'd like to start with what you're up to today and get some context of your life today. Then I want to go all the way back to the beginning and hear your story and ask a few questions along the way.
Well, let me give just a little bit of didactic perspective before I answer your first question. Two passages that have really impacted me in practical terms. First from Psalm 90, where Moses writes, "Teach us to number our days aright, that we may gain a heart of wisdom." In that passage, he says that normal people get about 70 years. If you take care of yourself, that might stretch to 80. And then Jesus, on his way to Gethsemane, prays in John 17 to his Father and says, "I brought you glory on earth by completing the work you gave me to do." Well, and that was a pretty remarkable statement when he was 33 years old. I'm 73 years old, and I want that to be my concluding statement when my run is over. But I've come to realize that life happens in stages. I think that's what Moses was probably addressing when he wrote. And for me, it really involves looking at life as a four-stage drama that starts from the first 20 years as learning is the agenda for youth. The next 20 years, it's about launching, and the enemy would love to see a failed launch by disrupting the integrity that God requires for those that will achieve his ultimate objective in their lives. The launch is important, 20 to 40. From 40 to 60, it's about leading. And that's when most of us assume our highest position in organizational life. It's where we have the greatest amount of territory under our watch. It's when we're still in an acquisition stage. We're exerting our influence. We're doing what we think is our prime. But around age 60, we enter into a new phase, or should. Our society is wincing under the leadership of people who don't know when to leave the stage, and people who have aged out in terms of their effectiveness but have tenure and won't leave. I really believe that last quarter of life, at around 60 and going until about 80, it's about legacy. It's about finding the opportunity to go from being the person in charge at the king stage and moving into a of counsel status as a sage. And so to get to your original question, Joe, I'm comfortably in the fourth quarter. Our friend Bob Buford wrote the book Halftime that challenged people in the middle of life to consider recognizing the importance of their calling alongside their career as being a critical companion that should not be overlooked. But I've really found that this fourth quarter is a period when too many of my peers have succumbed to the cultural model of an aspiration to become the rich fool of Luke 12. Many goods laid up for many years to come, bigger barns that give me a self-security that says that I can now post my victories on Facebook every week and taunt my follower world with regard to where I am, what I'm doing, what I'm eating, where my selfies place me in the world. And that's an inadequate answer to the question of the fourth stage. So I'm in the fourth stage. What am I doing today? Of the organization that I founded 40 years ago, that launched 30 years ago, the master's program, I still have a relationship there, but not as the leader. I'm now the patriarch who, like my family system, where I'm the grandfather who attends everybody's games and provides the affirmation and the attaboys that they may not get anywhere else. I'm able to have that relationship with the ministry leadership that has succeeded me in leading what God allowed me to be a part of starting. But then I've also found that my opportunity beyond that in the kingdom has not been dialed back. So I serve on about 8 boards of directors, 3 mega churches in 3 states, 5 organizations that run the gamut from Samaritan's Purse on one end to Amerson Ministries, active in the U.S. Congress, which is a 2-person employee count, but high leverage in terms of its impact. The California affiliate of the National Christian Foundation, which is a significant stewardship encourager here in the Golden State. There are a few remaining Christians, so we have a market to serve. People who have not moved out of California believing that they can't practice their faith here. But I'm at a great moment in my life where I'm able to offer counsel and with mentoring to leaders with whom there is no sense of conflict or competition, because they know I'm not out to acquire new territory or push anybody out of their chair with aspirations of filling it myself.
So I heard this quote that really applies to the 4th stage that you described. After 20 years of learning, 20 years of launching, 20 years of leading, 20 years of legacy, this individual told me, now what I'm doing is growing fruit on other people's trees.
We cite, with that line, we cite a comment that Peter Drucker made to Bob Buford, our mutual friend, when he said, Robert, your life is about investing in others because your fruit grows on other people's trees. And that has become a familial dynamic that Bob, who helped as a co-founder of the master's program really 30 years ago, because Bob gave me the initial kingdom investment to get the master's program up and running. And it was really at response to his request of me. His book had just been published, and he said he was getting comments from people who had read the book and didn't know what to do with it, and asked me if I would consider creating a ministry that would serve them. And now 3,000 graduates later, we've been able to help folks process this concept of finding and fulfilling your kingdom calling. We invest decades and dollars in clarifying our greatest career opportunities, but leave untouched the massive companion question of, great Luke, you're a wonderful doctor, but I wonder what else you've got in there that could have lasting impact. I'm sure that in his youth, Luke never imagined that he would be remembered in history as a historian and biographer whose works would be foundational to the greatest book ever published and distributed. So in not a dissimilar way, each of us is in a search and discover and maximize a journey in our lifetimes to really find out what God packed in our spiritual DNA that in many cases is yet to be discovered and maximized.
So what's that look like specifically for you, and what was your journey going from, as Bob Buford said in the tagline to halftime, changing your game plan from success to significance, if not even surrender, Bob told me in his final days?
Well, surrender, I think, has a lot of derivative possibilities. For me, it has been about surrendering to the reality that is loaded into my mortality and my life against the backdrop of God's flow of history from Eden to eternity. And so for me, Joe, that means, I was raised in a family that the demographers today would call the working poor. We were my dad's second family in a time when that was not a normative model. That my parents married with a fair amount of personal baggage, and when their baggage came together, it didn't create a happy space. I left home at 17, and I had succeeded in kind of being president of anything I was ever a part of, from school to youth group at church to you name it. But there was no provision in my family for anything beyond high school. The assumption was you graduate and you leave. And so a month after I turned 17, I graduated from high school because I had skipped a grade. And I moved out a month later and never went back. And Sherry and I married a year later when I turned 18. And I married into a family business. Her dad had 200 employees, a company they had founded 25 years before. He had 4 daughters at that time. None of them were interested in entering that mechanical contracting business. So I became a solution for his succession need, and he brought me into the business, taught me the ropes. I came up from literally the bottom of the pecking order to the top of the totem pole, and he stepped back and gave it to me as an opportunity to run. And my entrepreneurial chops came to life, and we grew by about 400% in 5 years, became the largest company in our category in the 14 Western states. But while I was doing that, my approach to the business was very much strategic, not tactical. I was about getting the right people on board, getting them trained, getting them all focused together toward where we wanted to go, and then stepping back and letting them do it. And that allowed me the creation of a tremendous amount of margin time. And I dedicated that margin not to recreation, but to developing a personal ministry out the back door while we were doing business out the front door. And not unlike our mutual friend, Bob Buford, he was born into a family business where he was the second generation following his mom's leadership. And Bob similarly built the business of Buford Television as a strategic leader while developing a lane for his kingdom calling that ran in alignment alongside that. I did the same thing and found that that's really where the fulfillment in my life was coming from. We had an opportunity to sell the family business when I was 28 years old, and I had no equity in the business. I got no proceeds from the sale of the business. I made my father-in-law a very happy and wealthy man. But what it freed for me was the family obligation to run it as long as it was in the family. And I was able to step away and redefine my life in terms of what I really believed God was calling me to do. What started as a ministry to marketplace leaders over the course of the next number of years continued to morph. I was I was always cognizant of the fact that where a lot of my contemporaries were moving forward based on good educations that they had gotten from reputable schools, degrees that defined what their strengths and marketable capabilities were. None of that was on my resume, but I backstopped my life and leadership with the access I had to mentors who shaped my life.
Yeah. Before you go there, Bob, and talk about these mentors, can I just back up a little bit? You had 2 dads. You had your dad, and then you had your stepdad or your father-in-law. What lessons did you learn through what sounds to be some very muscle-building, challenging seasons in your life? Can you back up and talk about that a little bit, please?
Sure. My biological dad was not a source of a lot of transferability. And he worked hard. He provided for the family at a minimal level. But there were not a lot of values that were transferred from generation to generation. Mm-hmm. I found in my father-in-law much more healthy and wholesome family leader.
Mm-hmm.
And he and my mother-in-law had been sadly burned by off off-course pastor early in their married life, and had soured them
Mm.
on church.
Yeah.
And so there was not a strong church experience in their family, but there was a strong faith, confidence, and foundation in their family. So he was a great example of leading in a very moral and biblically sound way in his business life. But he had no sense of calling beyond just living the benefits of a faith foundation, no sense of ministry expansion or exposure beyond just doing the business in an ethical way.
Yeah. So it sounds like, and it's the case, I think, with many of us, a good example, bad example, they can both be very useful, especially when they're at the extremes of that. And it
Mm-hmm.
sounds like you were probably saying to yourself, I don't want to live like this, and I don't want to live like this, because both of those holes seem to shape the filling of those in your own life.
I benefited greatly by the fact that Lauren Grissett was a man with great local integrity and reputation in our city. He was the mayor of our city. He was an elder in our church. He was very committed evangelical. His uncle was Cameron Townsend, the founder of Wycliffe Bible Translators. And Lauren was deeply involved in the Christian Businessmen's Committee, CBMC, which was the marketplace ministry of note in the late 60s and 70s. Lauren saw something in me. He brought me under his wing and mentored me as a young Christian in business, and promoted me far beyond. My father-in-law put me in professional positions that no thinking, rational person would have entrusted to me. Lauren pulled me into leadership positions on a national level with CBMC that put me alongside guys who were a decade or more my senior, but with whom I achieved peer status by invitation. And so the value of mentoring in the absence of a clean sort of textbook generational flow, what God taught me early on was that you may not have been born into privilege, but you can be invited into privilege in the things that matter the most.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you give credit to those who influenced you, it reminds me of that verse that says, "A companion of the wise will become wise. A companion of fools will become a fool."
Yeah.
And you had some wise companions. And so now I think we're at the intersection of wise counsel, the master's program, and you had worked, I think it was for about 14 years in the construction business, and you described how people are coming in the front door to do business with you, but you got people coming in the back door that are more interested in ministry, and you love that. And the back door, you told me once, became more attractive than the front door, and that helped you make that switch from the construction business. Then I think you were a pastor for several years, and then you
I
moved.
started in ministry in 1984 as a primary pursuit, and with my tongue lightly in my cheek. What I'm often heard to say is that after 7 years of ministry, I guess I got diverted into politics when I became the senior pastor of a church of 10,000 who had suffered the loss of their founding pastor through moral disqualification. And I served there for 4 years and brought about some transformational change in the direction of that church. Merged it with Mariners Church in Newport Beach and exited upon that occasion. But that church is now about 25,000 people every weekend in multiple sites around Southern California. But when I came out of the church assignment, Bob Buford was waiting to redirect me It was in sync with the time that his book came out and the momentum behind the halftime movement began. And so that set in motion what really would become the signature contribution of my lifetime.
So how did you meet Bob, to go back to the genesis of that relationship?
Bob had already begun seeking out leaders to serve in the 80s through his establishment of Leadership Network. And we met through that. He brought together guys who were involved in ministry in the marketplace, and I was on that short list. And we met, and he was doing an annual event called the Foundation Conference, which I became a resource for, spoke for in a variety of topics and places. And we just found a resonance in our commonality, both of us having sort of established ourselves in our for-profit lives, but then transferring momentum from that lane into a parallel lane that had nothing to do with our income production life, but had everything to do with our impact production life. And that commonality allowed us to develop a relationship that continued when I exited the ministry leadership to become the senior pastor. I fit the profile for what he was doing with Leadership Network with senior pastors of mega churches. And so I became involved as a participant in Leadership Network's early days. And that relationship continued. I mean, in May of 95, Bob and I were in Chicago being interviewed by Leadership Journal, which was a publication of Christianity Today, for an article they were doing on business leaders in the local church. And so when we finished that interview, we headed for O'Hare Airport. We had lunch at the O'Hare Hilton before he went back to Texas and I went back to Newport Beach. And just over the lunch, he shared with me the responses he was getting to his 6-month-old book, Halftime, and asked me then if I would consider creating a ministry that would respond to the needs that were being expressed by the readers of his book. And that set in motion a virtual partnership that allowed us to benefit from a very common sense that, as Bob used to say it, there was the greatest untapped asset in the Christian world were the leaders who were parked in pews and not allowed to exercise their leadership in the evangelical movement.
What year was that he wrote, excuse the interruption there, what year did he write Halftime?
Halftime was released in the fall of 94.
And so that relationship was really grounded right in the mid-90s. And then you mentioned this idea of a parallel track. What's that like, dealing with your head and your heart and your time and your relationships when you got that parallel track going on?
Some folks are able to integrate their professional life and their kingdom life in a way that makes their calling a career. Ron Blue is a friend. We've been in cahoots, not Calhoun. We've been in cahoots for decades. Ron was able to integrate his for-profit life and his kingdom life through his role in helping to shape the professional direction of advisors with regard to finance and stewardship. And that work continues today on a very broad front in multiple streams. But Ron's experience is not typical. Most Christians that I've met and served have a very clear track in terms of what they do for money, but their clarity about what they do for meaning is very premature, very underdeveloped. The great model for us is the Apostle Paul, who as a day job was a tent maker, but in terms of what he's remembered for forever is the work he did in parallel with that in establishing outposts for the Christian faith around the Roman Empire, bringing the gospel and leaving in his wake converts and churches that would become reproductive as he moved on to his next stop. And that model of tent maker and apostle is a great picture of a both and rather than an either or. Now, some of the folks we serve ultimately come to a place where they have the opportunity or the option to sign off on their income production and devote themselves more significantly into what they do for kingdom impact. And that's great if God moves them toward that outcome. But we don't advocate that as a necessary or exclusive or preferred result. If that's the path that God has for them, great. But if the opportunity is there to sustain one's marketplace presence while developing their kingdom identity, that's a very viable and historically impacting approach to life.
Mm-hmm. So, as you're going through all those changes in your life and you're stepping up to what God's calling you to do, how were you able to hear the voice, the nudge of the Lord saying, "This is the way, walk ye in it"? Were there some specific times where God directed you, Bob, along the way?
Joe, for me, I had access to mentors like Lauren Grissett, like Chuck Swindoll, like Howard Hendricks, like Bob Buford. I had access to mentors that most folks just don't have the ability to come alongside and relate to on a personal level. When Chuck Swindoll, decades ago, when he was pastoring a church in Fullerton, put on a weekend conference on mentoring, and his program included Howard Hendricks, Chuck, and me. We were the three generations of mentorship that Chuck chose to platform. So I was the product of mentors. I still mention them frequently enough that I do not claim credit for the things that trace back to them. I want to make sure that honor to whom honor is due. But the reality is that I realized that there were guys coming to me saying, "How did you get where you are, and how can you help me figure out where I'm going?" That I couldn't send them to Chuck Swindoll or Howard Hendricks or Bob Buford and say, "Go talk to these guys," because access to those guys was a privilege of relationship that I had cultivated over decades and could not be replicated. So it caused me to step back and say, how do I create a process by which what I received on a one-on-one basis could be multiplied across cohorts of guys who, Joe, for me, the last few years I was pastoring, some of my most important work was being done over lunch with guys who didn't even go to my church, but who had called and said, "Could we get together?" And because I had years of relational access in the marketplace, doing ministry with Christian guys who led organizations, I was available to them. And when we would get together, it was almost as if the conversation had been scripted. They would say, "I've got a unique situation. Nobody else is going through what I'm going through." And then they would go on to describe this thing that they had achieved all of their professional objectives. They were making more money than they ever thought that they would make. Their domain was bigger than they ever thought that it would be, but something was lacking, and they were wondering what in the world they were missing, and knew it had something to do with what God had made them to do. As we like to say, career is what you're paid for, calling is what you're made for. And there's a difference between what you're hired to do and what you're wired to do. And a lot of guys feel it. Well, I would send guys away from a 2-hour lunch with strategic flow charts drawn on the back of placemats that they would fold up and protect like it was the 67th book of the Bible. And I just discovered that all of these guys who said they had a unique situation, in fact, had a common situation among guys who were at the same stage of life. And so we just found a way to codify the process so that the same approach that God had allowed me to acquire through the successive contribution of influence from mentors in my life could be replicated in the lives of other guys.
Yeah. So, I want to answer my own question, knowing you like I do, and knowing your heart and motivations like I do. When we ask people, how do you know God's speaking to you? The number one answer is you look to his word and you let that living word speak. And I think it was Jesus who said, go and make disciples. And you took that very seriously. You were making disciples and you were building his kingdom. And
Correct.
if I may, there is wisdom from a multitude of counsel. You line up these at least 5 really wisdom providers, and you're being led by wisdom and wise, the word and its wisdom and these people and its wisdom. And obviously you're a very thoughtful guy. You're strategically navigating your way down this journey, down this path that God had for you. Is that a fair capture?
It is. One of my early influences and a good friend, Charlie Tremendous Jones.
Ooh, love Charlie.
You remember Charlie.
Oh, Charlie.
Charlie had a
come
great
on.
line. You are the same man today that you'll be in 5 years, except for the books that you read and the people that you meet.
Exactly.
And so, having missed the 4 years of academic experience in an undergraduate college degree, I've just made it my life mission to keep reading books and keep meeting people. And I want to operate with a undertone of curiosity that says, I don't have all the answers, but I'm looking for them. And we've been able to cultivate that in the posture that we like to influence and model with the folks that sign on for a 3-year journey through the master's program to reset their objectives in terms of what they want to see happen over the course of a lifetime, not just in the course of a 3-year strategic planning horizon.
I think that you're expanding that now, empowering other people to facilitate that. Can you tell us about that? What's going on there?
Sure. We went through a very intentional and deliberate designed succession process about 4 years ago. It was timely because God allowed me to develop acute myeloid leukemia 4 years ago right now. And I was given a 12-month horizon of life in the original diagnosis. So we took an already existent succession plan and triggered it and brought the next generation of leaders into play who would perpetuate the ministry model that we had perfected over the course of some decades. I'm now Henry Ford, who gets to walk into the Ferrari factory, and they attribute me with founder status. The truth is, it has morphed into even better forms in its new era of leadership than I would have ever imagined myself, but they still honor me as the guy that got it kickstarted. But we really have found that our underlying value proposition, which is balance, margin, and focus, unless my life is balanced, God will not use me to my maximum kingdom potential. Margin says that if I'm operating with 120% allocation of my available capacity, God will not bring new opportunity my way. So helping guys first get their lives in order with balance and then be able to create capacity for more in margin opens the door then for our third offer, and that is focus. Once your life is in order with balance, once you are available through margin, the enemy would love to get you distracted and diverted into things that have nothing to do with your calling. And we have just come to understand that calling, if I was creating a Venn diagram, calling is at the intercept of God's kingdom purpose, your God honoring passion, and your God designed potential. God's kingdom purpose is found in the great commandments and the great commission to love God, love people, and make disciples. That's what Jesus was here to model, and that's what we're here to pursue. Our God-honoring passion, God never did anything because he had to. His love drove him to everything that he ever did. And for us, too often, we found passion in the wrong things, or we found ourselves committed and locked into things that we have no heart for. We long for a day when we can be bought out or retired out to be able to go do something that we really would prefer to do. And calling is about finding the thing that nothing would be superior in value except your family or God himself. That passion for something that God has a heart for. I serve on the board of Samaritan's Purse. It was launched by Bob Pierce, whose prayer was, God, break my heart for the things that break the heart of God. It's about finding where our passion points us. And last, what is our God-designed potential? Sadly, marketplace voices have done a better job of helping people figure out their uniqueness than most of our faith-based systems have offered. And until I really get clear about who God made me uniquely to be, and can do an inventory of the things that have been entrusted to me and for which I will give an account someday, I have not yet found the place where my leverage can be maximized. And so that discovery of purpose, passion, and potential, and where they come together to give direction toward calling, is the breakthrough that is the game changer. It was for me. It continues to be for the men and women who experience the master's program process.
So what's that look like? I know people used to go to Southern California once a quarter for 3 years. What are people doing now, and how do they access the master's program?
Mastersprogram.org will get you to the opening page that will give you a deep dive on what is happening there. Live cohorts meet in strategic center points around the country. Virtual versions that are offered via media like this that allow a cohort to have everything but the third dimension in their ability to connect and process together. But it's a 3-year, some have likened it to an executive MBA in kingdom leadership. That's a fairly good descriptor, but it leaves short the depth of the spiritual dimension, the biblical foundations, and the extensive outcomes that point us toward a world that is waiting for the kingdom to arrive in strength and establish the connectivity to the Lord Jesus that we were originally sent to offer, and that we're carrying the banner on. This has been a 2,000-year relay race, and we may be running the last leg of that race. No one knows, but it sure seems like the crowd is on their feet cheering, and there's a tape not too far in front of us.
Can you give us an example of that story? You know, people go in with the same need, the same elements that are missing in their life. Can you tell us a story about an individual that went through the master's program and was able to make their way over to the other side and
Sure.
find fulfillment?
I've got a few thousand stories.
I thought so.
One of them that is fresh just came out of the Pro Athletes Outreach NFL annual conference, where about 10% of the active players in the NFL with their wives came together for a 4-day event where their common faith in Jesus Christ and their recognition that their professional career in sports gives them a platform from which they can do things bigger than product endorsements and hedonistic lifestyles. That effort is led by a guy by the name of Steve Stenstrom, who grew up in Orange County, went to Stanford, has records as a quarterback already still there, played for 8 years in the NFL, came out of that, then went into the master's program with me. And coming out of that, God made it really clear that Steve had a future in impacting people for eternity that was in process, and ultimately led him to become, about 14 years ago, the president of a 40-year-old ministry to professional athletes. And so pro football, pro baseball, hockey, all under the, or basketball, under the auspices of Pro Athletes Outreach. Steve's giving great direction there, and he tributes his discovery of his capacity to his time in the master's program and the ongoing influence of our mentoring in his life. John Reinhardt is a guy that I began mentoring and came through the master's program. God put in John's heart a recapturing of the stories of marketplace leaders over the course of centuries who had been underwriters of breakthroughs by famous ministry leaders, but for whom the patrons seldom got attribution. The guys and gals who had underwritten their efforts. Where are the stewards in the stories of the missionaries and ministers? John wrote a book called Gospel Patrons, and that book has become a movement, and John's one of the upcoming voices in the field of Christian philanthropy and stewardship, but is a product of the master's program as well. And if you've got time, I've got about 2,998 more stories that range from the predictable to the you can't begin to imagine that this could have been possible.
Yes. So I met Bob in the late 90s. I think it was 98 or 99. And he was one of 3 individuals speaking. The author of Soul of the Firm was there. The author of Point Man was there. And Bob was there. And I hooked up with the president of Halftime in the early days and became a facilitator, taking groups of people through the Halftime workshop, we'll call it, and then helping them find their way to the second half.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one workshop we did. It was in Lexington, Kentucky, and people came into the room after a couple hours and said, "Hey, I was just watching TV in the hotel here, and it looks like something's going on in New York City." And I went and looked at it, and I said, "Well, there's not much we can do about that. Let's get back to work."
Wow.
And then after 9/11, I drove home a couple days later and experienced that really special spirit that existed in our country after 9/11. I got pulled over by a policeman. I'd been driving a rental car from Lexington, Kentucky to Kansas City, and I was almost home, and he pulled me over, and I told him my story, and he said, "Slow down, be safe. This one's on me." And I wonder about like regular guys, like me and others, Bob, that maybe they think, if I had a couple $1 million, I could do that too. But I have a couple dollars, and what can I do? And I'm curious as to this message and how it applies to others.
I think back to an encounter that we were able to orchestrate and then observe. A guy by the name of Dr. Don Schoendorfer, who 25 years ago saw the plight of tens of millions of people around the world that needed a wheelchair but could not afford one because in the third world, a wheelchair cost about the same as the annual income of the average worker. And so people were crawling on the ground or being carried by loved ones to try and integrate into their communities. And Don had a vision for an affordable wheelchair that could be manufactured from available the white stacking plastic chair with mountain bike wheels and tires with a custom steel frame that could be manufactured and delivered for under $100. And Don's vision for addressing the mobility crisis stalled him because he was an inventor. He had no idea how to get his concept, which was now in prototype form, manufactured in his garage to a world of need, and brought it in front of some of the guys who were master's program players and said, "Can you help me?" And all of the expertise that he needed in terms of shipping and supply chain and international manufacturing and getting through governmental regulations, there was not a single aspect of the creation of a pipeline to get a solution created in Southern California into dozens, scores of countries around the world. And from it, the free wheelchair mission was born. Don would say today, 25 years later, that had it not been for those master's program graduates, that ministry would have never been brought to life. And today, they've been responsible for distributing almost 2 million wheelchairs free of charge to the recipients in dozens of countries around the world, made possible by marketplace guys who said, how in the world could my knowledge of how to manage supply chains and container shipments and tariff issues and government regulations, guys who brought things that they never imagined God could utilize in the invitations they got on Sundays to work the coffee cart or be a member of the parking patrol in a crowded church parking lot. They finally found something that their expertise could be employed to advance causes for the kingdom.
Yes.
Because every one of those wheelchairs was going to go out with a attached message of God loves you, and the wheelchair is just the start of what he wants to see happen in your life.
Those stories, we could just tell stories like for another hour. One of the guys in Lexington, it was so inspiring to hear what he was doing. He took the Bible, put it on a handheld device, solar powered it, put it in the language of the Middle East, and was distributing these devices, getting God's word all around the Middle East. And these stories are just amazing, what people can do with the creativity that God has given us to build his kingdom and to bless people with the good news.
More to come.
So when you look back, Bob, I know that it wasn't all easy. And I'm wondering what some of the challenges and obstacles were that you faced in your journey that might be encouraging to others who are also facing their own challenges.
The strain of entrepreneurship runs through any population, and there are some who try to feign it and never succeed. There are others who know it and never get an opportunity to express it because they get caught in organizational structures that disallow the kind of risk-taking and creativity that brews incessantly in the heart of an entrepreneur. I just choose to recognize that when Jesus was recruiting the original leadership team for what we now know to be a worldwide solution to the problem of sin, They were entrepreneurial guys who were out of the box thinkers, who were prepared to run counter to what everybody's expectations about them would have been. And the same continues today. So, Joe, you could take every challenge point for an entrepreneur in the for-profit world, transfer that into the context of the kingdom, and multiply it times 10. And you'll find that when you're setting out to do what you believe God's called you to do, you will have more naysayers than you have encouragers. You will run out of time and money before you get to the milestones that you said were necessary to prove sustainability. You will be tempted to hold your sense of perfectionism to a higher standard than your need for expansion. And so your ability to raise up, trust, empower, and delegate becomes one of the breakthrough capabilities that entrepreneurs often fail to embrace. The risk of working in the business and not on the business, and letting an enterprise see its great potential by getting out of its way rather than being the limitation yourself. All of the things that make the greatest marketplace successes or failures known are evident and recurrent in the world of God's kingdom. And so, I've had all of those. I remember a point about 20 years ago where things had gotten rolling and we believed in what we were doing, but the marketplace was in some bad straits, and it translated into the ministry, and we ran out of money. And were we going to shut the doors, or were we going to keep it going? It wasn't a long conversation with my wife to say that we were going to put a mortgage on our paid-for house and release funds into the ministry while turning off the salary tap from that ministry, and believe that God was going to bring us out the other side, which he did. But it was months getting to a place where we could get back to a stable condition. Entrepreneurs know what it is to mortgage the kids' home and their college fund to prove that your concept and your heart belief in whatever it is that your business is about is proven true. So, transfer and multiply, because there isn't always spiritual opposition to creating a new for-profit entity, but there is always spiritual opposition in launching and perfecting something that will claim territory for the kingdom of God.
Yeah. So we have just a few more minutes here, Bob. I'm wondering if there's something that I should have asked you or that you wanted to share that we didn't get around to.
My ultimate goal is to be an influence, a factor in helping people understand and pursue the potential that God has embedded in their spiritual DNA. And I believe that the regret of eternity will be when I look back and see what God was prepared to do through my life that I never had the full understanding of or the faith to claim. And so we're helping folks figure out how God made them to be niche players who would be GOATs, greatest of all time, who would be irreplicable because we were all made to be one-offs, not artist-signed copies of an original that hangs on the wall of a museum somewhere.
So in light of all that, what advice might you give listeners, big picture, broadly applied advice? What might you say to us?
The greatest challenge and the greatest opportunity exist in the context of your kingdom calling. Until you can be as articulate and concise about what your calling is as compared to your citation of your career, you've got some discovery and some development to do. knowing what you're here for is far more important than being able to recite your job description in the classic elevator version of your position defense in your organization.
And in the simplest of terms, what kind of things might people do to get started on that journey of discovering and developing and deploying?
Well, Bob's book is still in play. Halftime is a great stimulator. It will cause angst that will motivate you forward in terms of self-discovery. A myriad of books that can help in that journey are available and in play. But it's about knowing God better, knowing yourself better, and knowing what is going on in his kingdom today and where you might fit. His kingdom is bigger than your local church. His kingdom is served by people who are launched by churches that understand that the greatest measure of their impact is not how many people come on the weekends, but how many people go out during the week.
Mm-hmm. I have some kind of silly little questions that I want to end with here before I ask you to maybe pray for the listeners. So,
sure.
So what is one of your favorite books other than the Bible?
Wow. As soon as you say favorite, my mind goes sideways because I don't have a favorite anything, Joe. I read incessantly. I just don't have favorite books. I read through the Bible 1.5 times every year. And I'm reading constantly because guys are sending me books for review and endorsements. And my favorite book is always the last one I read.
Got it. And what was that?
Right now I'm in David Jeremiah's books on heaven and the coming golden era. I'm fascinated with the fact that we've undertaught our ultimate destination. Randy Alcorn's a good friend. Randy's done more work in helping Christians understand where we're going. Most Christians are more informed about where they're going on vacation this summer than they are about what God has chosen to reveal about where our eternal destination, heaven, is. So if you ask me for a favorite book, I would say Randy Alcorn's book, Heaven. Mm-hmm. Between Halftime and Heaven, there's a pretty good combo.
Perfect. By the way, just to make sure I got it right, you did not get a college degree, but you're still going to college and you're actually learning and applying.
I used to mistake the fact that advancement came from good schooling. I've come to realize that advancement comes from good learning, and learning may occur in school, but it's not, predicate is not to go to a classroom. I decided that for me, I was going to go create relationships with the guys who taught the classes and wrote the books and get the short course.
Perfect. Okay, so you might not have favorites in these next two categories either. I watched Seabiscuit the other day. I've only seen it about 10 times. What's one of your favorite movies or a couple of your favorite movies?
Wow. Favorite movies. Again, Gladiator, I think, grabs at the heart of men and gives a sense that even without any biblical basis for the film at all, it challenges men to think beyond, as the general said, what you do today echoes in eternity. And I want what I do today to echo in eternity.
Terrific.
And that's...
Where do you like to go to renew? I mean, Southern California is where most of us go. Where do you go, and what are some of your favorite vacation spots over the years?
Wow. We live by the beach, but we like to go to the mountains. And so Colorado, we had a second home with some partners as a ranch in the Colorado Rockies for 15 years. back to Colorado, Breckenridge, Vail, that kind of thing. Summertime, off season is big for us. The Cascades, south of Bend, Oregon, up in Sun River. Those are the places where we go to reconnect. If
Got
the
it.
air isn't thin, it's not my favorite.
I invite you to pray for the listeners today, if you'd be so kind.
I'd be honored. God, thanks for a relationship with Joe that goes back decades. Thanks for a relationship with some people that are watching this that goes back minutes. But God, I pray that influence toward the things that are important to you would come out of these minutes that Joe and I have spent together and the minutes that our listeners, watchers have devoted to this. Holy Spirit, would you underscore anything that you're hoping to say to us from this conversation that advances the cause of recognizing why we're here, why you came, where we're going, and what you're prepared to celebrate and reward when we arrive on the other side. God, we are all works in process. Don't ever allow us to be satisfied with our level of development, that we would continue until we see Jesus to become more like him and more committed to his kingdom. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Bob.